You ever watch a show that just makes you ask, why? Not even why bother, or why does this exist, or why would you even? Just why? Because saying even 2 words would be much more effort than the show in question merits. Mike, Lou, and Og is that show. It is the most boring show. Period. This is the most boring cartoon that I have ever seen in my entire life. That probably sounds harsh, and in many ways it probably is, but I think it's warranted. I mean, the show seems harmless enough. And to be fair, the show is such a nothing that it's not even really worth hating outright, which is why you won't ever see an atrocities type review about it. But the shows that are worth hating are the ones that end up getting remembered in the end. When you get down to it, Mike, Lou, and Og is one of the worst kinds of shows. It is so nothing that it is not worth liking, it's not worth hating, and in between it all, it's not worth remembering. Except for one little factoid, the funniest thing about it. Cartoon Network thought that this show was going to be their big hit of the year, and were totally surprised when people liked Courage the Cowardly Dog even more. Courage. I guess this is just what happened to animation corporations in the 90s, when they had their sights set on their own little pet project, and something completely surprising blew it out of the water. You know how like Disney thought Pocahontas would have been their big hit over The Lion King. Where do I even begin with this one? I suppose the premise. It is bad. So we have this girl named Mike. She is from Manhattan. The premise is that she is on a tribal island with 6 people on it. If you're losing track, that's half the cast of Ed, Edd and Eddy, a show that had a severely limited cast that had trouble making that work towards its end. Also, the way they go about forcing this premise is just really stupid. Like, it would make total sense if Mike was just shipwrecked here and that was the plot of the show. But apparently, back at school, Mike was invited to this cultural exchange program and she sarcastically said, "Tropical Island," and they just put her on this random island with 6 people on it. That sounds like it should be funny, but because the show is just nonchalant about it and never really makes a joke about it, it just ends up raising a lot of questions, and it makes it seem like the orchestrators were a special kind of fucked up. Like, the premise of the show is a demented way of paying back sarcastic sass. It also doesn't help that one episode of the show is about Mike waiting for mail from her best friends in the entire world back home, and she finally gets a letter in the end that tells her that they've moved on because she's gone on the island and they're not even gonna care anymore. Roll credits! Have you ever seen a show where the modern person teaches the not modern people modern concepts? You know, video games, candy, apartment buildings, stuff like that. I'm gonna guess yes, you've probably seen it time and time again. That's the show. That's the entirety of Mike, Lou, and Og. It's full of stock plots and concepts that would be difficult to make interesting and unique for one episode in a real show. However, here it's stretched out for 2 whole seasons. And in the end, Mike, Lou, and Og comes across as the worst kind of unbearable. They do mix in some City Mouse stuff, which might have worked if Mike had any real character to speak of. But that's all she is, just the City Mouse. She's a tomboy girl from Manhattan. That's her character start to end. She gets excited about things from the modern world, because the show is about teaching modern things to these people on this island. It's also paper thin, it's really hard to care about, and it's even harder to give a shit about because according to the concept of the show, Mike put herself in the situation. Once again, if she was like shipwrecked or whatever, I might feel something. But Mike is the dumbass who said Tropical Island and didn't say anything else while the whole trip was being orchestrated, and who didn't raise any objections when specifically an uncharted island was brought up, when she could have argued, I don't know, Hawaii counts as a tropical island. The Bahamas. So every time she complains, it's like, you asked for this. So, the 6 characters on the island. Lou is the daughter of the mayor, and she is a spoiled brat, and she calls herself the island's princess. How does she set herself apart from every other spoiled brat in cartoon history? By torturing a turtle constantly. Oh wait, no. I've seen that one before too. Lou has nothing unique about her. Then you have Og. He is the child boy genius whose purpose it is to invent the Manhattan stuff that Mike wants to introduce to the island. How does he set himself apart from every other boy genius like Dexter or Jimmy Neutron? Simple. He talks really quietly.
Cumulus, Caromantis serpulina, or foam nest tree frog.
That's his gimmick. According to the writers of the show, this is equivalent of a personality. Og is also in some group with animals who talk to him, but only because they don't think anyone else on the island is intelligent enough to deal with them. But that subplot amounts to nothing but wasting time since they're so often a non-presence. Like, it could be interesting, it could be a fun twist, but the talking animals are like so barely involved. In the end, it feels like talking animals were just on someone's checklist of how to make a cartoon, and they were put somewhere to fulfill an obligation. Then you have the adult characters. There are 4 of them, and here's the really sad thing. Despite having an extended cast of 6, 2 of the characters you can classify as like tertiaries that only pop up once in a while. Queeks, the old guy, is the grumpy old guy who is sometimes a fortune-telling oracle because we need tribal stereotypes, or what is even the point of doing this. And the rest of the time, that he's on the show at all, he's an old neighbor guy who lives up in a cave. Then you got Wendell. He's the governor, and he's there to fill up crowd shots and give his daughter a reason to call herself princess. And that is his role in the show. And yes, what your mind immediately went to, this is so fucking stereotypical, we should never do it idea that went straight to your head. Season 2, Episode 1B, Mike and Wendell compete to be the governor on the island. Then you have Marjorie. She's there to do whatever. I think the show wants her to be an artist, but there really is no other way to describe her except as a person. She doesn't really have much of a character. She's just there if the story needs a character to do something that none of the other characters are immediately interested in. This character does not have a consistent character. Then you have Alfred. He is a hunter who is trying to hunt down a wombat. He constantly fails and never succeeds. Slapstick ensues. I've seen a much better version of this. Yes, that one came out later, but I'm bringing this up because this live-action show does cartoon antics better than this cartoon. This guy here just feels like the leftover scraps of Nigel Thornberry. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that this entire show just looks like discount Klasky Csupo. The blobs that look more like potatoes than actual people, abstract shapes for hair, a stylistic ugliness that kinda sorta works on a Tuesday. True story, I actually did have to look up and see if they actually animated this show, because the art style is just that derivative. But no, the studio who made Mike, Lou, and Og was called Kino Film. And literally, the only thing I could find out about them is that they made Mike, Lou, and Og. The guy who did make the show did work on Rugrats and Real Monsters, so there is a reason for the show to look the way it does. But if the logo on the show doesn't say Klasky Csupo, the characters shouldn't either. Their art style is just too iconic, too distinctive. And unless you're doing a direct homage, which this isn't, it's gonna look like plagiarism. Look, I'm not stifling you here. There has never been a show with more nothing or less than a point ever made than Mike, Lou, and Og. What else is here? Some pirates that want to eat the turtle? Bumbling pirates, SpongeBob SquarePants. Fucking hell, tropical vibes, SpongeBob SquarePants. Honestly, at this point I'd rather watch Coconut Fred, because then I'd actually feel something. Coconut Fred was at least daring enough to reference Final Fantasy VII directly, instead of just generic Game Boy video game. Oh yeah, then there's also the turtle. So many of the episodes just end with the turtle smiling at the camera. Even if the turtle had nothing to do with the plot, it'll just randomly have the turtle turn to the camera and grin and make a stupid noise. Roll credits. I can't recall an episode that made me frustrated or angry or whatever. Lou is an asshole and she does asshole things, but it's so paint by numbers that it doesn't even register. Jerk character does this. Why? She is jerk. This is cartoon. This is one of those shows that makes you feel like you've had a lesser life for having watched it. And that's something I can't say for even some of the worst shows that we'll be getting to. As the credits roll, you just feel emptier and more hollow.